They called her the 10-year-old widow, a little girl who never played with dolls like other children. In the village of Umwoma, a little girl was forced to marry a man before she could even walk. On her 10th birthday, she was taken to his home, but that same night, he died in his sleep. The villagers called her cursed, and for 10 years she lived as a widow in black. But one day, love came knocking, and with it, the truth that would shake the whole village. Stay with me till the end, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African stories. In a small African village where the air carried the sound of talking drums and whispers traveled faster than the wind, there lived a man named Peter. Peter was not a lazy man. He woke before the rooster crowed, worked from sunrise to sunset on other people's farms, and came home with aching bones. But no matter how hard he worked, he could barely feed his wife Anna and their only child, a baby girl named Grace. Peter's wife, Anna, was heavy with child when trouble came knocking, trouble dressed in the fine clothes of a greedy man. That man was Matthew, the loan shark. He was the kind of person whose smile was sharper than a knife, and whose heart was as cold as the Harmattan wind. If you borrowed from him and could not pay back, he would take your land, your goats, or even your father's farm. To him, people were nothing. Only their possessions mattered. Peter had borrowed a large sum from Matthew a year ago. He needed the money to rush Anna to the city hospital when the labor pains became too much for the village midwife. His wife lived. His daughter Grace was born strong and beautiful. But from that day, the weight of debt rested like a grinding stone on Peter's back. He tried everything, farming from sunrise to sunset, carrying loads for traders in the market, even digging wells in neighboring villages, but nothing was enough. The interest kept growing like a stubborn weed, and Matthew kept coming to his door with a mocking smile. One evening, Matthew arrived at Peter's home. He was wearing his usual white caftan and chewing a stick of sugarcane as if life belonged only to him. "Peter," he said, leaning on the doorway, "you and I know you will never pay this money, but I am a generous man. I will forgive your debt completely if you give me your daughter to marry." Peter's heart stopped. Grace was only 1 year old, a baby. He stared at Matthew as if he had spoken madness. But Matthew only grinned, his teeth shining in the last light of day. For weeks, Peter resisted. He could not even imagine such a thing. But the pressure grew. Matthew spread rumors in the village, shaming Peter for owing him. Food became scarce in Peter's house. His wife's eyes grew hollow, and one night, when the sound of his child's hunger cries pierced his heart, Peter made a decision that would haunt the years to come. The marriage rites were performed in the strangest of ways, with the villagers whispering, shaking their heads. Matthew gave Peter a paper to sign. Grace would remain with her parents until her 10th birthday. Then she would go to her husband's house. The elders nodded in approval, and just like that, Grace, who could barely walk, became Matthew's wife on paper. The years passed like a river flowing to the sea. Grace grew into a bright, curious child, full of laughter and questions. She knew nothing of the agreement made when she was a baby. To her, Matthew was simply Uncle Matthew, the rich man who sometimes brought her sweets. But time does not wait for anyone. Her 10th birthday was drawing near, and with it, the day Matthew would come to take her away. No one knew that when that day came, the story would take a turn so dark, so strange, that the village would speak of it for generations. The sun had barely risen over the village when the sound of drums began. It was not the joyful beat of a wedding. It was not the loud call of a festival. It was a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of a story that was about to turn dark. That day was Grace's 10th birthday, a day that should have been filled with laughter, friends, and the sweet smell of roasted corn. But in Grace's home, the air was heavy. Anna sat in the corner, her eyes swollen from crying through the night. Peter paced the floor, his hands trembling. Grace, dressed in a simple blue wrapper, tilted her head in confusion. "Mama, why are you crying?" she asked softly. Anna swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "I am just thinking, my child." She could not tell Grace the truth, not yet. How could she explain that today her own father had promised her to a man who was old enough to be her grandfather? Not far from their hut, Matthew was preparing too. His compound was decorated with palm leaves, and the smell of goat meat cooking in a clay pot filled the air. He had waited for this day for 10 long years, telling himself that Grace would grow into a perfect young wife. To him, this was not strange. But to anyone with a heart, it was deeply wrong. By mid-morning, a small crowd had gathered in front of Peter's house. Matthew arrived, dressed in a fine white agbada, his walking stick in hand. "Peter," he called out with a wide smile. "It is time." Anna clutched Grace's hand tightly. Grace looked from her mother to Matthew, confusion clouding her face. "Mama, where are we going?" she whispered. Anna's lips trembled. She wanted to scream, to fight, to grab her daughter and run far away. But she remembered the threats. She remembered the debt. And she remembered that in this village, a promise made before the elders was a chain that could not be broken. The elders arrived to witness the handover. Peter stood stiffly, his eyes on the ground, as Matthew reached for Grace's small hand. Grace hesitated, looking up at her father. "Papa?" But Peter could not speak. He simply nodded, and Matthew led her away. The walk to Matthew's compound felt endless. Children playing by the roadside stopped to stare. Women carrying water from the stream whispered behind their hands. Grace clutched the edge of her wrapper, her small feet kicking up dust. By evening, the marriage-welcoming feast began. Guests ate and drank, talking loudly about how Matthew had waited patiently for his young bride. Grace sat quietly in the corner, her wide eyes scanning the strange new place she was to call home. That night, the moon hung low over the village. The feast was over, and the compound was silent. Grace lay on a small mat in the corner of the main room. Matthew, in his fine clothes, went to his bedroom. He told the househelp not to disturb him, he was tired. But by morning, the sound that woke the village was not the call of a rooster. It was a scream. Matthew's servant ran through the streets, shouting that his master was dead. People gathered quickly, crowding the entrance of his compound. Matthew lay still in his bed, his eyes closed, his face pale. Before the sun was fully up, the story had spread like wildfires. The village square was like a market, without traders, full of noise, but with no real business. People gathered in small groups, talking in hushed tones. Some said Matthew's spirit had been taken by angry ancestors for his greed. Others said it was the work of evil forces. But most pointed their fingers at one person, Grace. She entered his house in the evening, one woman whispered, and by morning he was dead. "Can you not see? She brought bad luck." "She is cursed," another muttered. "Even as a child, she has the heart of a witch." Grace was only 10 years old. She didn't even understand what marriage truly meant. She sat on the bamboo mat in Matthew's hut, hugging her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had not touched food since they brought her from her parents' home. She didn't know that in the eyes of the village, she was now a widow. The elders gathered. The chief, a tall man with a beard streaked in gray, rose to speak. "Matthew is gone, but our tradition is clear. Once a husband dies, his wife, no matter her age, must live as a widow. She will not marry again. She will wear only black. She will wear no ornaments. This is our way." Anna, Grace's mother, fell to her knees before them. "She is only a child. Please, she cannot live like this. Let her come home and grow up like other girls." The elders looked at one another but shook their heads. "The rules are the rules," they said. "Even the river does not change its course for one canoe." And so, Grace's life became a long road of shadows. She was allowed to return to her parents' house, but the black widow's cloth was tied around her small waist. She could no longer join the other girls when they danced at festivals, for her clothes could never be bright. She could no longer braid her hair with beads, for widows must wear no ornaments. Children whispered when she passed. Some ran away from her, believing her touch could bring death. Peter watched his daughter's spirit sink lower each day, and guilt gnawed at his heart like a rat in a grain store. Years passed. Grace grew into a tall young woman, graceful as her name, but still wrapped in widow's black. By the time she was 20, she had learned to keep her eyes on the ground when people stared, and her heart had built walls as strong as the village shrine. But fate is like the wind. It changes direction when you least expect it. One market day, Grace went to sell cassava at the neighboring village. That was when she met Daniel. He was tall, with eyes that carried warmth instead of suspicion. When he spoke to her, he did not look at her black clothes or the beads she was not wearing. He looked at her, just her. Grace tried to keep her answers short, but Daniel kept finding reasons to speak to her again and again. And on the day he told her he wanted to marry her, Grace's heart began a battle between tradition and love. But little did she know, if she said yes to Daniel, the truth about Matthew's death would finally crawl out from the shadows. Grace did not sleep the night Daniel asked for her hand in marriage. She lay on her raffia mat, staring at the thatched roof as the crickets sang outside. Her heart wanted to say yes, but her mind heard the voice of the elders. Once your husband dies, you can never marry again. The next morning, she went to the river to fetch water. Daniel was already there, waiting under the shade of an iroko tree. "Grace," he said, "why do you keep running from me?" She kept her eyes on the ground. "I am a widow," she whispered. "In my village, widows cannot marry again. It is forbidden." Daniel's voice grew firm. "Grace, traditions are meant to protect, not destroy. If a rule is built on injustice, it is no law at all." Her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever spoken for her like that before. But deep in her heart, fear still held the key. "If I marry you, they will say I have cursed you too." Daniel took her hand gently. "Then let them speak. But before I marry you, I will find out the truth about Matthew's death. I will not let shadows rule your life." Daniel began to dig into the past. He spoke to Matthew's old servants, his drinking companions, even the herbalist who once treated him. Slowly, a different story began to emerge. One night, an old servant woman called Mama Esther sent for Daniel. Her voice shook as she spoke. Matthew was not killed by Grace's spirit. He killed himself. Daniel's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Mama Esther looked around to be sure they were alone. Matthew had a sickness of the heart. The doctor in the city told him he might not live long. He knew it, but he did not tell anyone. The night Grace came, he drank palm wine mixed with strong herbs to make himself strong, but it stopped his heart in his sleep. He was gone before the moon crossed the sky. Daniel's chest burned with anger and relief. Grace had been innocent all along, a child crushed under the weight of a lie. The next day, Daniel went to the village square and demanded a gathering of the elders. "For 10 years, he said, his voice carrying like a drumbeat, "you have called Grace cursed. But the truth is this: Matthew's own greed and sickness killed him, not the girl you condemned. You made her a prisoner of your traditions for nothing." The crowd murmured. Some elders shifted uncomfortably. The chief's eyes dropped to the ground. The women began to clap in agreement. Grace stood behind Daniel, tears streaming down her face. For the first time since she was 10, she felt the chains around her heart begin to break. The chief rose slowly. "We were wrong," he said. "From this day, the rule that binds widows, no matter their age, is broken. Grace, you are free to live and to love." And so, Grace and Daniel were married in bright colors that lit the whole village. She wore beads in her hair and danced until the moon smiled down on them.